We talk a lot about dating, but I think one of the hardest things is about where do you begin in this process of getting to know someone. So today, we're going to talk about first date questions.
Be sure to click subscribe so you can get notice of all our new content hot off the press.
Few suggestions about first date questions. Here is one I would avoid if you're two middle-aged single people. Why did you get divorced?
That's a really common one too, right?
Very common, and it's an understandable curiosity, and it's also a point of empathy. The problem with that is when that happens on a first date and you spend the whole time talking about how awful your exes were, kind of leaves you feeling icky at the end.
And I would have a different reason for not asking that. I think it's a very intimate question. And if you're gonna get a real answer from someone you just barely met, that's a boundary issue for both of you. We think it's just a simple question, but it's never that simple.
Save the therapy session for your therapist. There's gonna be time to get to all of that stuff about your divorce. And on a first date, keep it light, don't fight. By that I mean, if you don't agree politically, move on to a different subject. If you don't agree completely on religion, go to a different subject. Let's not pick little fights with each other on a first date. Get to know the person, what's in their heart, before you start wading into those sensitive issues.
I would like to talk a little bit about fielding insensitive or ill-timed questions, because you're gonna get them. You're gonna want to be able to know how you want to respond with a plan. I know I didn't have a plan. And so it took me a while to realize that I didn't have to answer every question that I was asked. For instance, Jeff, if you and I just met and you said, hey, tell me why you got divorced, I could say something like, I am an open book with people I know well, but I just met you. So I'd like to maybe save that conversation for when we get to know each other better.
Give a very brief but honest and genuine answer, and then say, I know there's a lot more to it than that, but right now I'd just like to get to know you a little bit before we venture into that subject.
Right, so you could do one or the other or somewhere in between, whatever you're comfortable with. Just make a plan in advance for what you would like to be feeling comfortable talking about early on in a relationship, and you are not required to share everything about yourself with someone you just met.
Yeah, and I think you can reassure your partner that, look, if this relationship grows a little bit, we'll get to that. So that it doesn't look like you're evading the question or you're afraid to tell someone, because that's not really the issue. The issue is getting to know the other person other than just commiserating about how awful your divorces were.
Now, if you're a really blunt person and you want to say, it's none of your business, I'm not willing to talk to you about that, and just leave it at that. You could do that, but it's probably going to halt relationship progress. So I do think it's important to reassure people that you do want to be able to share things about yourself, even if you're not ready for that particular subject yet.
A couple of suggestions, one of which is not necessarily about the questions you ask, but let's not spend the entire time talking about your ex. Secondly, I think it's really important not to dominate the talking time. Give your partner a chance to talk. In fact, if anything, focus on listening more than talking. Third, stay off your phone. Now, we understand people have kids. I went on dates with kids at home on occasions, and you don't stop being a parent just because you're on a date. But make it clear to your kids they're not supposed to call you when you're out on a date unless there's an emergency. A dispute over what to watch on television is not an emergency. Try to be respectful of your date, and while you're with that person, have your focus there, and certainly not on social media or carrying on a texting conversation while you're on a date.
I'm a big fan of taking pictures of the people I meet because I want to be able to remember my time with them. You pull your phone out, you take the picture. Instead of putting it back on the table or in your seat, tuck it away, because there was a study that when phones were visibly in sight, even if they were off and they weren't being touched or used, people shared less in those conversations than when the phones were not physically present. That's actually something we try to do on our married dates now. For any of our later married couples who might be watching this, we would like to encourage you to try that and see what happens.
Those are a few ideas. Now, what are good questions to ask on a first date? A few of mine are, what books have you read? Do you like biographies or novels or historical treatises, or gives you an idea if you have an intellectual compatibility or if you enjoy some of the same thoughts and ideas. And if you don't, then maybe you learn from each other, but that's a jumping off point. That's what Cathy and I initially connected over, is we were both very much dedicated to personal development. Is it a surprise that we got married and started a personal development organization and wrote a book? No, because that's...
And it was never in the plans.
Right.
It's actually just quite naturally who we are together as a couple.
What are experiences that you've had? Maybe you were a missionary in a foreign country or a different state and you learned interesting things. Who were your friends when you were in high school and college, and what did you major in college? I mean, there's a myriad of fun questions you can ask that really help you to begin to get to know someone.
And it can even help someone who may be a little newer to the dating realm after a serious relationship loss to be able to ask those kinds of questions. We would even call them skilled questions that allow that person to maybe be reminded that they're more than their divorce. We had a comment come in on the dating paradox video we did a few weeks back. She said, you know, for those of us who have never been married, we don't want to be bombarded with these divorce stories, so please make sure you're healed and ready. And of course, that's what we encouraged in the video. We would also like to encourage those who are in a better place, or either more healed in that journey, or who maybe haven't experienced that kind of loss, to ask these kinds of questions. Because as you were, giving those questions, I was thinking, that would be a pretty fun conversation. It's light and it's relatively easy to answer and nothing really super personal.
I have a coaching client who messaged me a week or two ago talking about a date that she had had, and she talked about how in texting back and forth before they ever went out, the guy would ask her questions in the text, information about herself, not offensive things, but just, what kind of food do you like, stuff like that. She liked that, but then when they were together, he dominated the talking time. And she said, I think maybe guys do that when they're nervous. Oh. So just remember, when you're on a date with someone, job one is to get to know him or her. And that involves being a good listener. Not just listening to reply, but listening to understand.
As you really listen to understand and get to know someone, those are details you'll remember. I know you and I, Jeff, we sometimes talk about the people we dated and what we learned from them and what we found interesting about them. It makes being single a lot more pleasant.
One caution about talking about dating partners, if you're on a first date with someone, you can assume that they're at least interested enough to have gone on a first date with you. So be careful about spending too much time on people you dated in the past, or especially people you're dating right now. It's almost a little offensive. I'd be sensitive about bringing up other partners.
Well, and clearly with subsequent dates, you want to make sure you're being honest, obviously, about your dating patterns and what your level of commitment is in this relationship. We just don't want to over-communicate too soon, because that's private information and it doesn't really need to be discussed, because when you're trying to get to know that person, that's the person you're in front of, that's the person you want to focus on. One thought that came to me recently from a mid-single who's been on a lot of dates, she said, I learned to stop asking, would you like to serve missions with me in the future? And start asking, how do you envision spending your retirement? Because she feels like she gets more authentic answers when it's not a leading question, when it's not inherent in the question what she wants to hear, which can lead to dating chameleon tendencies. If you've seen our video on dating chameleons, it's when we try to be what the other person wants. And when we ask leading questions, it encourages them to respond in a certain way. Jeff gave a lot of really great examples of good questions, and then just keep in mind to keep them from being leading.
Right, so you might ask, what kind of food do you like, instead of, do you like Mexican food? Now, there's nothing wrong with asking someone if they like Mexican food, but you get a more colorful, more flavorful answer if they are sort of given the freedom to express however they feel about a particular subject.
Well, and if I was asked, do you like Mexican food, I'd think, I wonder what to this person would be the right answer. Whereas if I'm just asked, what's your favorite food, I think, you're really interested in getting to know me. Well, we hope this video has given you some really good ideas for becoming an expert at first date questions. Be sure to comment, like, and subscribe.
And remember, any time is a great time for more love in your life.